Our workshop facilitator tonight is Curry J. Hackett, a transdisciplinary designer, public artist, and educator. His practice, Wayside, looks to undertold histories to inspire meaningful art and critical research. Recently, Curry has been experimenting with artificial intelligence tools, and with which he braids Black aesthetics, kinships with nature, and pop culture to imagine surreal scenes of Black joy. This work has been featured widely, most notably Bloomberg and Architect magazine. His ongoing research project, titled Dralongso, explores relationships between Blackness, geography, and land. This project has received funding from the Graham Foundation, Journal of Architectural Education, and Washington Project for the Arts. I'll prepare the stage for our presenter with a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown from her book, Emergent Strategy. It is so important that we fight for the future. Get into the game, get dirty, get experimental. How do we create and proliferate a compelling vision of economies and ecologies that center humans in the natural world over the accumulation of material? First, we imagine. This is a time travel exercise for the heart.
I'm going to start with talking about my practice and even a bit on, going to be a bit autobiographical for a second. And I'll talk about like how all of that work, all those insights and reflections over the last really decade or so, I'm kind of bringing to bear when I interact with prompt-based AI applications. And then, as Courtney mentioned earlier, then I'll have you sort of help me build some prompts, and we'll be using Midjourney today. But really, the strategies that we'll be talking about are compatible, I would say, with any AI tool that you encounter, whether it's an image-based or a text-based one. And hopefully, at the end of the workshop, this tech is sort of demystified a bit, maybe a little bit less scary, and hopefully empowers you to sort of amend your own imaginations and find creative workflows that incorporate these tools within existing processes that you might have. So yeah, I'll just share my screen for a bit here. So again, we're going to be talking about AI tools. Again, I like to think of them, they use these tools sort of as a means to an end for a larger creative strategy, right? So just think of this as one additional tool that can sit within your toolbox. But before we start that, I like to kind of ground this work in a certain part of the world. And so I'll just kind of briefly talk about my upbringing, which is in Farmville, Virginia, which is in southern rural Virginia. My mom's side of the family has owned about 100 acres or so of land just outside of Farmville in a sort of farming village called Prospect. And this is sort of an aerial image of that land. And so, I grew up like very close to this place. It sort of inspired, I would say my own relationships with land, with nature, with plants, with the humans of my family, but also the more than humans that kind of shape the landscape and ecology of this place. And it's really sort of structured a lot of how I work, how I think, how I teach. And so I just wanted to offer this up as a kind of pretext for how I'm going about the kinds of work that I've been up to, particularly with AI over the last year. So exactly how did this work? To me, the AI work that I've been doing recently, how did this all come about? And so I'll start going back several years, I would say, to about 2015 when I started my practice, Wayside Studio. Wayside Studio is effectively just a multidisciplinary design studio that engages in public art, critical research that is ultimately trying to surface under-recognized, or as I sometimes say, under-understood cultural narratives. What I'm showing you now here is a collage of actual sort of window awnings that were photographed from various parts of the Kingman Park neighborhood over there in Northeast. And how we were like just kind of looking at this one detail that shaped that was kind of consistent in the vernacular of the neighborhood of Kingman Park. and used that actually to scale that up and amplified it and sort of had that inspire a larger set of custom designed seating elements for the neighborhood of Kingman Park. So this was a city commissioned public art project. We worked very closely with the Kingman Park community to realize this. It took 3 years to get in the ground because of the permitting and the compliance. But I just wanted to offer up the textures of like how that practice works and the kind of work it does. It's generally just trying to always look at, as I say, think inductively. So looking at the details and trying to expand and build up larger ideas that can kind of live in the public realm, as opposed to thinking deductively, where you have a really large idea and you try to work out the details that way. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is public facing, and is generally trying to surface some sort of narrative in the public realm. There's another photo of these. We actually worked with the community to create a living archive, and then took certain aspects of that archive, certain artifacts from the archive, and translated them directly into these concrete pavers here along the path. So that's just one of several projects that's come out of my actual practice. More recently, I would say, starting around 2019, I started teaching architecture. Actually, went to Howard University for undergrad, and then ended up teaching there in architecture in 2019. I taught architecture for 3 years, and I ended up co-teaching a course virtually during the pandemic with a friend, Jaleesa Bloomberg, at Carleton University, which is in Ottawa. And this all of my courses, but this one in particular, we were ultimately trying to think about like, what is the social spatial value or the social cultural value of Black modes of performance, Black diasporic modes of performance. And so we curated a set of performance methods that occur throughout the Black diaspora and offer them up to the students, and try to invite them to invent ways of drawing or annotating these different tropes. So in this case, Lorraine created a kind of drawing style to sort of diagram what happens when you double dutch, right? So this is an architecture studio, so very, very different than the architecture studio that I came through, but ultimately we're concerned with again, how to legitimize these forms of production, cultural production, legitimize these forms of performance as actual serious, sort of rigorous areas of study. And more importantly, try to trouble how we typically think about architecture, the public realm, and architectural education. Here's another example. Alia was actually looking at beating your feet. Of course, the DC locals in the chat will know what that is. This student was creating her own notational system and marking when certain actors were coming into view during this particular performance by the Beat Your Feet Kings. So again, like just trying to get the students to invent new forms of annotation, new forms of drawing, new forms of indexing, what is ultimately what we're considering a kind of archival material. Speaking of archives, this is a more recent project in which that I did here. I'm sorry, a bit of background. I'm calling in from Boston. I just completed my studies at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. This is a course that a project from a course that I just took called Environmental Histories Archive Landscapes, and in which we were invited to go into one of the hundreds or thousands of archival collections on Harvard's campus and try to invent a way of sort of indexing the collection that goes beyond just the traditional blurb on the database, the traditional finding aid. I stumbled on a set of letters that were written by a Black family in Virginia. Some of the members of that family were enslaved, like the woman that wrote this article, Polly Carter. She was enslaved on a plantation in Gloucester, Virginia. And many of the letters are written back and forth between the plantation there in Gloucester and her freed son in Richmond. So, this is me trying to use GIS or mapping tools to spatialize this collection of letters. And you can see here in the kind of data visualization, most of the conversation is happening leaving Gloucester and then arriving in Richmond with a few outliers there. And then I created this sociogram, which is basically trying to understand the social relationships or who's writing letters to whom in the collection. So I literally created a database based on the collection and then sort of manually drew these relationships. So you can see Polly Carter, the mother here, is writing quite a bit of letters. Actually, quite a lot of most people in the collection are writing letters to Hamilton Carter, the freed gentleman in Richmond. And as I say, you can see how many people are writing letters to him, but he's sort of leaving folks on red, so to speak. And then as I begin to look through the letters themselves, so I'm like handling the letters with my bare hands. I'm in the the sort of archival library here on campus. And I'm just starting to like go through like what's being written about in these lectures. And like at one point, Polly asks Hamilton to send his father some tobacco. And in another case, Polly references her master by name. So I'm just, just really eerie kind of handling these letters and getting these very direct glimpses into plantation life in the pre-war period. And at a certain point, I begin to realize that some of these letters, not all of them, but some of these letters would have been written at a time when it was illegal for Black folks to read and to write. So writing this apparently simple act of writing would have actually not come without some risk, right? So the act of writing, the act of transmitting these letters, as well as the paper itself, I was arguing, was not this neutral, apolitical material. And so it got me wondering, like, is there a history of Black folks making their own paper? If so, what would that look like? What would it have been made of? Would it have been tree bark? Would it have been cotton or linen? What did that look like? And so I basically, for the final project, we had to kind of create a forgery of something that could have been in that collection that wasn't. And I ended up thinking around this question of like, what would Black folks have been making paper out of? And, like what would that even look like at this time, let's say in the 1850s? And so I actually tried to make paper using materials that Black folks would have had presumably around available, namely okra, mugwort, which is a sort of edible wild weed, and collard greens. And this was the result there, right? So we have this, there's this arc on this project where I'm in the archival space. I'm engaging directly with the historical record, physically handling the historical record. And then there's this arc over, a 15-week semester. And I ended up with an artifact that is, I would say, semi-speculative. I would say purely fictional in the idea that it's rooted in a real history, inspired by real history. But ultimately, I ended up here because I have a question that sort of inspired a certain fiction. Right. And this project and this way of thinking is really what inspired me to work with the AI tools in this way. This project predated the work that I had been putting on the internet and my sort of explorations with tools like Midjourney and DALL-E by a few months. But this way of working, I think, is really, for me, has been really haptic. It's really generative, just like AI tools. But it's really helped me to think beyond the now. But also try to think in terms of like how do we create scenes and fictions and speculate on near futures, right? So like, how do we think just beyond tomorrow as opposed to in the distant future? All right, so we'll put a pin in that. That's kind of a little bit about me and my work and how I've been thinking, how I've been encountering practice and memory and culture and history. So what is artificial intelligence? Also known, one version of which is known as machine learning. And I like to think of it, this is a very, very, very simple diagram of how this technology works. But generally speaking, there are some inputs that you put into what's called a model. That model is embedded with certain algorithms that allow it to recognize patterns. You might have referred to that, might hear that referred to as training. Then we're able to use that recognition of those patterns to predict patterns based on new inputs. That's kind of where we come in, where we're able to prompt. And again, taken to its sort of conclusion, we can also automate the task of predictions sort of at scale, in some cases at the hundreds, thousands, millions, or perhaps even billions in some of these larger models, right? One of the applications that I use that works in this way is called Midjourney. Midjourney for me is like, I find one of the more robust models in which you interact with it like you're texting your friend, or like if you're familiar with ChatGPT, you text it a prompt, and then a few seconds later, it spits out a set of images. And you can kind of trial and error. There's all sorts of buttons and parameters that you can use to affect how the machine is interpreting your prompt. But I find that this has been a really great way of like rapidly generating ideas and rapidly generating sort of images. In my case, I've been using them to imagine these what I call Black near futures. This is generative AI. And the way that I've been thinking about how I can use these tools, and again, this is related to, I think, the Adrienne Maree Brown quote that Courtney mentioned earlier. I'm struck by this Octavia Butler quote when she says, you've got to make your own worlds. You've got to write yourself in. Whether you're a part of the greater society or not, you got to write yourself in. She's obviously talking from the Black and maybe the Black feminist perspective, and like, what does it mean for us to write worlds in which we are living in abundance, living with joy and agency? It's not always a given that we are a part of that scenario. We have to write it in, or maybe in the case of AI, we have to prompt it in, or if we're an architect, or we have to draw it in or build it in, right? And so that's ultimately how I see the kind of work that I see this project doing. This is, if you were paying attention during the carousel earlier, back in the photos from Farmville, this is a scene that you would see throughout the rural South. I like to say that if there's a container that can hold water and hold soil, there's a fair ground, fair use for to be repurposed as a planter. So in this case, on my great grandmother's estate, great uncle and great uncle's farm, they have repurposed an old tub and an old sink as planters to grow wild prickly pear cactus. And it's amazing to see this when it's like just dripping with fruits. And I just walk up to it and we're able to kind of pick those off out of the tub. And so and thinking about what how a Black near future could look, or a Black alternative timeline might look, maybe an alternative Black history, I've been able to like ask Midjourney, what if, right? Like if you weren't in the rural South and you weren't aware of this obscure but also very customary sort of cultural trope, this sort of cultural relationship with nature, what would it mean to kind of amplify this, take it out of context, and reimplant it or transplant it into a kind of uncanny, surreal setting? And so I used Midjourney to say, well, what if this wasn't in the rural South, but actually maybe, I think I used Harlem in the prompt, right? So you've got just hundreds or dozens of these tubs taking up like a city block in Harlem. So there's an effort to kind of take these things that are in the rural South and bring them into a hyper visible, perhaps more familiar and uncanny context. Similarly, like if you've ever been to the South, or if you've even been to, like, let's say West Africa, this is what the soil looks like. It's literally this red. There's very little color correction in this photo. And I've always wondered, as someone that grew up in the South, like why there haven't been more imaginative uses for red clay as an architectural material beyond just brick, right? But why don't we see more rammed earth? I'm just curious why soil hasn't been more pervasive as an architectural material in the South. But with Midjourney, I can ask, what if kids were, I think I used Richmond in the prompt. What if they were imagining, playing with red clay to make these ginormous, sand castles? I think I call them clayscapes here. And so, with this photo especially, I'm asking you to kind of suspend belief. Like I'm not really concerned about whether these things can stand up, or what about I'm not really as concerned about issues of safety. It's more so like, this is more so about me trying to conjure an atmosphere. Like, what would it take for this to happen? And most importantly, not necessarily situating Black liberation in the distant future, but actually thinking about like, how can these scenes play out? Let's say next year, next month, tomorrow, in the next 3 weeks, or what have you. So there's this kind of surreal photorealism, where it's somewhere between now and the future. I like to say that this work is trying to remember and imagine at the same time. And then at a certain point, I kind of got, less interested with just the images that were coming directly out of the model and just saying, oh, here's the image, like this is the thing. And so I started thinking about, like, I've been having a lot of fun with collage. Collage is typically how I like to work when I'm envisioning a proposal for a project or something. And so I started thinking about, like, well, what if I were to use AI images as assets or parts or fragments that I could then collage together? So this was part of a research project where I was looking at Booker T. Washington's so-called Tuskegee machine, in which he was, this was the funding model that he had when he was funding the early days of Tuskegee University in Alabama, in which he had the students harvesting the red clay soil to make bricks, which he then sold into the community, as well as using to make the early buildings of the campus. And so I used Midjourney to imagine, what that might have looked like beyond just this kind of prosaic diagram. And so I don't really know what that scene really looked like, but I can kind of imagine that it might have looked something like this, right? So I like to say that these images are kind of semi-speculative. So I took all of these assets together, these fragments, I cut them out digitally, and then manually collaged them together in Photoshop, right? So this is just another workflow that kind of amends just the basic capabilities of the AI machine that I'm using, right? And then I want to take a second and not necessarily paint these tools in an overly rosy lens, right? We definitely want to. A lot of folks are saying like, well, how are these images? Are these images doing more harm than good? There's environmental things to consider. There's governance and issues of ownership. I'm aware of these things, and I also believe that we need to kind of be working with these tools to understand their potential, and also figuring out how to rein these things in so that they're actually, so that they're not, the harms don't outweigh the potential good. There's a few articles that I've been thinking of, a few artists that I have that I pay attention to that I think are doing really interesting work that is situated somewhere between digital humanities and activism, in my view. And I think they're offering different sort of ways of encountering these tools that are ultimately concerned with doing creative work for doing good with creative workflows. One of those is Linda Dunya Ribes, who has been doing some really great work using generative models. She, in this example, she created her own model. So Midjourney, or many of the tools that you all are probably familiar with, like DALL-E, ChatGPT, Midjourney, those are models that are based on millions and billions of data points. She actually used kind of her own archival images that she sourced of endangered species of flowers and plants in West Africa, and used the AI to train like kind of new but slightly fictional, semi-fictional plants. So none of these plants exist, but she's trying to sort of almost create like a new historical record that can be in place for the day when many of these plants won't exist in our home country. Similarly, Mine Atairu, who's currently is a scholar and artist based in New York, is using AI to sort of digitally repair stolen artifacts from the African continent. The main focus of one of her research projects is the stolen Benin bronzes. So in this case, she trained a model, an AI model, manually trained an AI model on like, I believe 80 to a few hundred images of Benin bronzes, and actually had that machine kick out a kind of semi-fictional or semi-speculative Benin bronze. And then she was able to model that in 3D print it in bronze. And then this was the result of that in an art show at the Shed in New York. Right. So there's these folks that are mixing artistic creative workflows with digital humanities, historic preservation, activism. I contend that there's space for all of these things to happen sort of in spite of and in parallel with some of the ongoing harms that we need to mitigate of these models. And then lastly, just to kind of offer another sort of tangible outcome, this was a project that I did in downtown Brooklyn called Ugly Beauties, in which I was sort of trying to there's two narratives that I was thinking about. There's plants that are that are so-called weeds. So these plants that we kind of tend to banish to the periphery of our neatly manicured American lawns, even if they don't have any real harmful qualities to them. I'm reminded of the dandelion, which is fully edible. But as soon as one shows up in our front yard, right, we want to kind of pluck it so that we can maintain our monoculture. And so this was saying that, we tend to treat weeds this way. And then I was also making the case that like many Black folks, especially those that find themselves in urban settings, have sort of had to contend with things like redlining and other sort of forms of disenfranchisement. And was trying to put both of those historical narratives and sort of traditions, folding both of those onto themselves. So this was a collage, actually. So this is not one image that came out of Midjourney, but I manually composited out of, I believe, 4 different images that was trying to envision a world in which Black folks are interacting with weeds in this hyper imaginative way. But again, this could happen maybe next week. This could maybe be the Labor Day parade the West Indian parade that's coming up in a couple of weeks, right? And then this was, I'm showing you this on a computer screen, but this was actually printed on a 50-foot long tapestry that was then hung from scaffolding and then installed for 8 weeks in a public plaza in Brooklyn, right? And then just to kind of emphasize the tangible qualities of this was, a scene that I walked up on as I was doing some maintenance on the installation. But I just loved that this person was using it as a backdrop and literally kind of inserting herself sort of directly into this world that I had created temporarily. So hopefully that offers sort of the textures of how I work, how I got there, why I'm like this, and also maybe a bit of how you might think about how you might encounter these tools when maybe in this next workshop and beyond. So I'll put a pin there and I'll stop sharing, and we can open up to some Q&A.
Well. That was incredible. I told you, I said, I'm going to come on when I'm supposed to come on, I promise, but then I might nerd out and I did. And hence here late. Thank you so much for sharing that background. It looks like folks in the chat are also pretty enthralled. And you all can please feel free to ask your questions in the chat, but we do have some questions in the meantime. So let me pull those up because I have questions. Even going back to, let's go back to like the grad work, right? Where you chose the mugwort and the okra and it was one more. The mugwort, the okra.
Collard greens.
And the collards. Yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And that if they were to make paper, these would be like most likely. Tell us about some of the characteristics of those plants that really lend themselves to paper making.
Yeah, so it was actually similar to the AI work. It was actually it was kind of a trial and error. I made some assumptions that I was able to test throughout that process. I actually thought, because greens are so fibrous when they're not cooked, I thought that they would be perfect for the paper, right? Especially the stalks, right? The fibrous bit in the stalks. And I found that because you have to kind of cook them down to break down the cellulose to make the paper.
Right.
I found that the collard greens just cook. I think I might have overcooked them, so maybe I need to study this more. But I found that they just kind of cooked.
Okay.
They just cooked all the way down into like a goo, and they almost just ended up like just serving as a pigment for the paper. Oh. And the okra was kind of, because they're so mucilaginous, they ended up serving as the binding agent to kind of pull the fibers together. Okay. And the mugwort was doing actually a lot of the binding work. And that's why I showed the one on the left was unreinforced it was basically no recycled paper. Mm-hmm. And it was almost like lace or like dried kale. It had very little structure. It was very fragile. Mm-hmm. But I found that, I think, just the fact that, it was almost like aggregate, like I could have, like, any of those plants they could have had on hand could have acted as a kind of aggregate that was then bound with things like maybe recycled jeans that they could have had around, or recycled paper, which was how I ended up with that more rectangular sheet was the recycled paper was actually had enough cellulose to help bind the stuff together. But
Okay.
it's an ongoing study, and I think there's probably other plants that would serve even better.
Uh-huh.
But it seems like in the paper making process, if there's paper makers in the audience, please offer your tips. But it seems like the recycled paper was offering most of the rigidity there. And what I didn't mention was it was a really great way of, sometimes you just got to do the thing to kind of see what happens and see what questions emerge.
Yeah.
And I found that one thing that I did not think about at all in the paper making process was the smell. And so they had this very,
collards and okra and
yeah. But I mean, the paper, I mean, because I didn't really, I guess I did cook the collards down, but like
okay.
there was a kind of grassy green smell to the paper.
Okay.
And if Black folks were using these to send messages, I was like, oh man, like they could have been, what if there was nothing, they didn't have to write anything on the paper, but there's all these things that they could have used to encode the paper with information, like the smell, or there was all these happy accidents where like I left the collards out overnight after I'd already cut them, and they turned yellow after a day or two, and I came back and made paper anyway. And so those few sheets had a yellowish tinge. So I could see a world where like there was almost like, oh, if it's slightly yellow, that means so-and-so, even if I'm writing, it's all similar to how, following the drinking gourd,
Absolutely.
or how they
The
say,
quilts and the patterns.
Quilts, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. So it was just interesting how like the material properties of the plants themselves lent themselves to like a kind of database of symbolism and whatnot in this project. It was a really fascinating way of working for a good 2 weeks.
Yeah. And it sounded like it even helped you and motivated you to do an even deeper dive into these plants, right? And like they're more than vegetables, they're actually like living, and you can see their properties changing depending on how they are what they're exposed to.
That's right.
Even in this idea of more research, right? Like how have you found that, and I know you're going to talk more about prompting AI and that sort of thing, but out of curiosity, right, how have you found that your research into plants have helped you produce more accurate images of plants?
Ooh, yeah. I find that the more I understand the properties of the plants, and in some cases like the science, like the botanical structures, and like, oh, this is the pistil and this is the, like I find, or this is the root structure or what have you. I find that the better I am at inventing synonyms, which we can talk about a little bit later. But when I'm prompting, sometimes it might not know what chicory is. It might not know what burdock is. And so I have to kind of, like I know what the plant is, or I know what it looks like. And so I was like, well, what if it wasn't chicory, but it was like lavender colored daisies, which is not really what a chicory is, but like to the model, that's close enough that it can try to help it to get a little closer to my vision. Right. So it's almost like having to, like, in some ways you have to kind of abandon the like Linnaean scientific names for some of these plants and kind of invent your own taxonomy, which is just like a funny way of thinking about language and how the machines would sort of prefer. A lot of it is really like using the language that the machines would prefer to be interacted with, so that you can get closer to the vision that you have in your head.
Yeah, and I think that kind of answers some of the questions that are coming up in the chat too, which I know you'll go into more detail. But folks want to know, like, how do you start and iterate the prompts? And it sounds like we're hearing some of your mindset behind that. Like, one word is not necessarily universal, and you kind of got to play around with the descriptive imagery that the machine will understand.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, I don't know, I speak a little bit of Spanish, and like, when I find myself, it's so funny because like when I find myself not knowing a word, I end up having to like almost play charades with the few words that I do know. That are close enough to be like, well, it's not really this, but it's like a blue so and so, and like they're, oh, I see what you're saying. You actually mean this, and there'll be like one or two words that are way more concise than the description that I gave. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times it's just trying to find, it's just trying to mitigate that discrepancy between the word that the machine have in mind. And I don't want to over anthropomorphize,
Uh-huh.
but it's more so about like trying to touch on the words that might be in the labeling that
Yeah.
the machine has in the images in the model's training set.
Yeah, because the machines are not human, right? But
That's right.
there is a certain mindset that you're in. Actually, where we are at a good point where we can kind of dig into that, because the chat questions are really coming up. Like, how are we using Midjourney to get into these
Yeah.
images? How are we getting these prompts? And
Yep.
I'm sure, I think maybe toward the end, there might be some points where you can show your slides from earlier, because there are some
Mm-hmm.
questions about some of the visuals from earlier.
Yeah.
Folks that may
I'm
have
happy
joined.
to do that.
Okay.
Happy to do
All
that.
right.
Yeah.
All righty.
Should we move right into the workshop portion?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll share my screen briefly once more, and I'd like to kind of describe how AI, again, at the end of the day, it's patterns, it's algorithms. It's just for the sake of understanding how these models work. You might hear me use sort of anthropomorphic terms like think or see, and I just want to overemphasize that these are not, as we know, as far as we know, these are not tools and models that know where they're drawing. And so I'll just share sort of what I mean by that. And this is also like a sort of a primer on like how to thinking about like how, like what's going on under the hood when you're writing a prompt. So, okay. So this is a projection or sort of a three-dimensional word cloud, right? It's using an application, an AI sort of neural application called TensorFlow. And this particular model was trained on, I think, tens of thousands of texts, I believe in English. And it basically takes out of those tens of thousands of texts, it took the first 10,000 words, the 10,000 most popular words of that overall data set, and mapped in 3D space how similar one word was to another, right? So you can think of this as like a sort of constellation, and I can kind of swirl around in here. Like I can like this word right here, and I hover over it, like whatever the words are, the neighbors that are close to it are as in the way that the algorithm has kind of processed and recognized the patterns based on the training set. It will have a bunch of there's a cluster around it of words that are fairly similar to it. What's interesting about this, though, is if I were to type in, I'll make this a little bit bigger. If I were to type in cat, let's see, where is cat? There's cats. We'll just select that one. Oh, that one. Okay. So, sorry. Let me do this again. All right, so cat is here. So if cat was over here, and you would think that all the words that are similar to cat would be on this side of this sort of constellation here, what word would you imagine? And this isn't a trick question. What word would you imagine would be over here? And Courtney, feel free to shout out because we don't have anybody on stage. She there? Great. Perfect. Mike, great. Dog. Well, actually, if I were to select this word cat there, according to this sort of index here in the sort of database, cats is the first, the most similar word in to cat, and the second most similar word to cats is actually dog. And the reason why that is like because cat and dog we generally see them as opposites, or they show up as opposites in our, our sort of culture, or our language or linguistic culture. They're actually closely related in what we call, this is what's called a semantic space, right? So it just gives you, that's just one clue as to how like these things work. Like it's really based on similarities, relationships. And so sometimes you have to think kind of outside of how you would normally encounter how you might structure or a sentence, and try to think in the terms of try to make predictions about what words and how they might be situated in the model's sort of mind, if that makes sense. So that's just, I just want to, offer that up as a sort of as a way of sort of peeking under the hood and seeing how these models work. Okay. Hopefully that's helpful. And then I'll also show, so I'm going to be using Midjourney. This will be a Midjourney sort of, there'll be a bias towards Midjourney because that's just what I prefer. But these tools or these strategies can be used for any AI tool, any image-based AI tool that you use. The language that you use might be slightly different, but the general sort of meat of what I'm saying should be widely applicable.
And hey, Curry, I have the Miro link ready whenever you are. Okay.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
So. Sorry, I'm not seeing my Discord here.
No problem. While we are prepping, you all mind dropping in the chat what AI generator you may be using this evening? Because I know many of us, this is our first time. So which generators are you kind of playing with this evening? Okay, we got Firefly. That's Adobe, yeah. Okay, we got some Canva going on.
Great. Yeah, there's so many tools.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many tools that are coming out now. I think ChatGPT, when it came out in 2022, like really just cracked open the seal, and everyone and their mom is generating tools for these hyper specialized uses. You can now do AI. You can do text to 3D now, so you can even get 3D models.
Wow.
You can do a sketch, like a napkin, like a really crude napkin sketch, and it will try to make a building out of like a 3D fully modeled building. It's really getting crazy.
Wow.
So this is Midjourney. This is what I'm showing on the screen. For folks that don't know, Midjourney does not have its own native app or its own sort of native feature, similar to let's say, it's kind of like how DALL-E is really sort of part of the OpenAI ecosystem, or how Firefly is part of the Adobe system. Midjourney is actually an application that you can only access with Discord, which is like a sort of chat gaming app. And so you basically you have to subscribe to Midjourney first. You purchase a subscription; it's monthly, and then you can you invite it into a server. There's a public version in which everyone, like, it's kind of like Reddit. There's like public forums where everyone's prompts are public. I guess I can show that here. This is what that looks like. Right, so everyone you can see some wacky stuff in here, but I just love this because it's one of the only tools that I've seen where this exists. This kind of community exists where you can see how other folks are prompting and getting interesting images and effects. I actually learned quite a lot when I first started using this tool, but I have incorporated it into my own server so that I can prompt publicly in my own kind of bubble, my own room, and similar to how you might be used to using ChatGPT, or how you just text a friend, you text here in the text field. In Midjourney's case, this is one of the only tools that requires this kind of thing. But to interact with Midjourney, you have to there's this kind of prefix for the command, which is /imagine, right? And then you can type your prompt. Right, so I already had one in here just so you can kind of see what it looks like. I'm just going to copy that here into my prompt. So I've got a collage of Black women gathering, wearing costumes, and da 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 da. I've got a couple of parameters, which I won't go too much into. These are just these things with the double hyphens here. That's just things that you can type in at the end of the kind of tags at the end of the prompt that can help to change the behavior or how the algorithm is interpreting your prompt, right? So the AR, for instance, here is actually stands for aspect ratio. And that means that instead of the default square, I can actually have it be landscape, or I tend to use 9:16 because a lot of the images that I'm using, I'm posting on social on Instagram. So that's vertical, which is great. So I'm just going to hit enter, and then in about 10 to 20 seconds, you'll start to see an image happening. And what you'll see is basically what will happen is what's called a seed. Which is every prompt begins with a seed, which is basically just randomized static. And then the image, the model is looking at the pixels of that random data, and trying to almost like peeking or squinting at clouds, is trying to understand patterns. And then it does that process repeatedly until it gets to a pattern, which is really all a photo is a bunch of pixels of certain data, of certain RGB values that resemble the kind of pattern that it has interpreted from your prompt, if that makes sense. And so this is how this is what happens when you get an image out of Midjourney. We've got several buttons here. We can do what's called upscaling, in which it'll take one image and scale it up. It'll add more detail. Right now, they're all kind of sketches. And then you can also, there's this set of buttons down here in which you can create versions of any one of these 4 images. So I love that, like, it just gives you, instead of having to prompt for every iteration, you can save a lot of time and explore a lot of different directions really rapidly, because it gives you four iterations, 4 versions of this idea at the same time. So in this case, I was like, I really like how colorful this one is. I'm not sure what's happening. I want to know more. It looks really sketchy. I'm just going to hit, this would be the second image in this set, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to upscale this second image here. Right. And very quickly, because most of the information has already been generated, you'll see that I've got a pretty large, pretty high res image. And I can open this in my browser, which I don't. Yeah, I can open it in my browser, you can see how much detail is there. Right. What's cool about this, for folks that are working in the Adobe environment, you might be familiar with Photoshop's generative fill feature. And so there's things that you can continue to do. I can continue to operate on this image now that it's been upscaled with a new set of tools that Midjourney will present to me on the upscaled image. So one of them I like to use is the vary region. I don't use it often, but when you need to, maybe if someone has 11 fingers, it can be nice to reprompt to just that one part of the image, right? So let's say, actually, I really want to do something else in this part of the image. Maybe I don't want the capital there. We'll see if it works, but we'll see. Maybe I actually want the Washington Monument there instead of the Capitol building. Right. And I can reprompt it, and it will only regenerate. You'll see it'll only regenerate the part of the image that I prompted. Everything else will stay the same. So this is really cool for folks that are in the crowd that are into making animations or videos. You can actually string together several images and have only one part of the image kind of moving or changing. And so you can then kind of create these really interesting kind of stop motion-y animations. So you can see, it looks like it only kind of halfway worked, but we get 3 or 4 different versions, 4 different iterations of just that one area of the image that I had highlighted. Right. So you have quite a bit of control with this tool. It's really awesome. I can also create versions of versions. So maybe it's like, I like what's happening here, but I want to create a few more I want to create a few more, a few more versions of that. I'll just come here, and I'll get 4 versions of that. Let's see, it's going pretty fast. Good. Once this loads, we'll switch to Miro, and then I'll ask you all to help me make some prompts here. So this is great. So this can help me make, really make some interesting creative decisions. I might I didn't even know that I needed this part of the image, right? And that's also where the collage workflow comes into play. I might just like bits or fragments of a bunch of different iterations, and I can then take all of these raw images into, say, Photoshop, or like I showed with the Ugly Beauties project in Brooklyn, and manually start to like collage images together using one-of-one images, because they're not coming directly from the internet, right? And similar, and I wanted to mention earlier, similar to that word cloud model, all these images are doing when they're looking at their training set. These are tools that have, I always like to say, these are tools that have no relationship to the truth, right? Or no relationship to a kind of reality. There's no sort of internal model of the world that they are sort of reacting to and building conclusions from. When you see a photo from in its most basic form, from a coding standpoint, a photo is just a very dense grid of pixels. Each of those pixels has 4 values: red, green, blue, and brightness. And the machine is basically looking at the values of that grid, which is basically a giant list or a giant Excel spreadsheet, is how you can think of a photo. And extracting data and understanding the patterns, and like, well, how much does the bluish black sort of the edge of my shoulder, how much does that change before we go into the brown of the soil behind in my background, right? So that's basically what is happening when AI does like edge detection. That's how this image even knows how to do a green screen in the first place, right? It's literally just looking at, it's like autocorrect but for pixels, or it's just looking at pixel data and trying to kind of like interpret patterns based on how it's understanding my prompt. So I hope that's helpful in terms of that's why it hallucinates, or what we call hallucinate. That's why it creates kind of wrong or apparently wrong. It's wrong to us, but to the machine, it actually makes a lot of sense, because it's just doing whatever pattern it has discerned in the data set. That's all it's cooking up for you when you get something back. So that's why people might have 20 fingers on one hand, right? Because it doesn't know that it's drawing fingers, right? It just knows purely in a kind of fundamental sense, like what a finger looks like. And that generally speaking, fingers kind of look like this, and they're attached to pixels that resemble hands. But I don't really have any semantic sort of understanding of how many fingers ought to go on a human hand, right? So long-winded explanation of how these things
fingers. Can we say make sure it has 5 fingers? Is that even work?
But again, you can try, but like, again, that's you trying to get it to think more truthfully, which isn't a thing, right?
Right.
So all it understands is fingers, a bunch of photos of fingers and hands, and it's like, but it still doesn't really understand at a fundamental level, like what fingers are, why fingers are, if that makes sense, and why they, why they're attached to a hand in a certain way, right? It has no concept of an anatomy, for instance, so for me, it's just helpful to think. It also just helps me to manage my expectations of what the machine can do.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, we've been over here playing in the chat, man. We totally stole your prompt and have been going.
Oh, great. I love that. I love that. Well, we can, if it's helpful, we can even you maybe feel free to throw that Miro link into the chat. And we can play for a bit.
Yeah.
So we'll do this for about 10, 15 minutes, and then we can move to the final Q&A.
Cool. There you are, folks.
So
Yep, me and Grace shared it at the same time. You got double, folks. Whichever, both of the links are the same.
cool. Everyone, let me know if anyone has any issues accessing this, but it should be public. Everyone should have editing privileges, but we're going to join in Miro. And would it be helpful for me to share screen, or?
Yeah, it probably. At least, is there another screen that you want? I mean, once we're on there, though, because I can see.
Yeah, I'm wondering. Would you want to share your screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't we do that so I can still kind of see what's happening on my end?
Perfect.
And what I can do is I can actually bring everybody to me as well.
Okay.
I'll show you what I mean. Yeah.
Here we are.
Okay, so I think I can. All right, everyone should be able to see what I'm seeing on my screen, right? Everyone should be able to see me moving around. So basically, if you let go of your mouse and just you can let me drive. And so if I do this, everyone should be able to see my screen. Okay. So but basically what we're going to do here is, you saw, again, the primary way of interacting with these tools, I saw, whether it's Canva, whether it's Firefly, is through text. You can also bring in images, and that's a more complicated workflow, but just know that you don't have to only interact with text, but it's the primary way that you interact with these tools. For me, I find that it's helpful to think of a prompt as having 3 to 4 parts, in the same way that we learned in English class, the structures of a sentence, right? We have the predicate, the subject. For me, it's helpful to think about, what is happening in the, literally what the title of the talk is. How do we actually break down the prompt or the vision so that we can get the machine to quote unquote see what we want, right? The world that we're after. So I think what would be great for us to do is, with these Post-it notes here, is to break down a would-be prompt into a few different fragments. So we want to think about, just close your eyes and think about a memory or even a fictional scene. What is happening? Who is in that scene? Okay, whether it's yourself or people there, who is in that scene? And then, for the sake of this, to keep things on theme, what kinds of plants are in that vision? And then what are you doing with or to those plants? Are you cooking with them? Are you wearing them in some way? Are you installing them on the side of a building as a kind of architectural material? That's something I would do. Where are they taking place? What's the environment? Is it a room? Is it a church? Is it on the beach? And then where in the world, so slightly different than environment, but where in the world is this? Is this in DC? Is this in, Mexico City? Where is this? Is this on a farm in Kentucky? Where is this? So think about that, and think about that scene, try to distill it into a sentence. And then what I like for everyone to do, for let's take 2 to 3 minutes, go through each of these 4 columns and fill these out. And one thing, before we get started, because I want to make a note about bias here. Well, I'll just mention it. Miro, Midjourney, like any AI tool, is loaded with bias, right? We like to think of these tools as robots or somehow non-human, but actually they're loaded with a lot of human subjectivity. Humans created the data set, which means they're, inherently finite, inherently limited. That means that there's going to be certain defaults when you're trying to prompt something in Midjourney or any other tool. If you type in doctor or architect, it's probably going to serve up, even if you hit prompt 20 times, it's probably going to give you a white man as that architect, or as a botanist. It's probably going to be like a white guy. So the default typically is, I found, is for these folks, for these models, is the default tends to be sort of like a white, conventionally attractive, able-bodied, cisgender man. That's just a fact of the model. The further you are away from that default, the more description you have to add. So if you're a Black maybe queer presenting disabled woman, you have to add more of that sort of language into the prompt to get the machine to be more accurate to the vision that you're after.
Hey,
I hope that's clear to everybody.
yes, that definitely helps. Thank you for telling us about the bias, because some of us may give something to try and be very surprised at what.
Yes.
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 What
Yes.
is the thing we're thinking about as we're answering
Yeah.
questions? Are we just is it in general the world we want to see? Is there like a specific
Yeah.
prompt?
So a lot of for me, a lot of these visions are rooted in a kind of nostalgia from my hometown, or they're based on things that I might have heard, memories that my mom or my grandmother or my family might have shared with me back on that farmland. I would think about, what is a memory that you have, a positive, hopefully joyful memory that you have with plants, whether it's cooking, whether it's farming or gardening, whether it's just playing in a field with grass. What is that memory? Try to think of that memory in terms of a sentence. Feel free to write it down if that's helpful, and then break it down into these 4 components that I've outlined here in the Miro board. So, if you're a 63-year-old Black woman, and you have this memory, or maybe it's not a memory, maybe it's a dream of where you're frolicking in a field of cacti. And so that the field, I guess, would be the environment, I guess, in this case. And that field happens to be in the middle of Central Park, right? So you can be really wacky. It doesn't have to be a thing. It could be a memory. It could be a dream. Happy to get weird here. So just kind of, we'll take a couple seconds and just kind of fill those out there. And once we get a few, looks like we're getting some really great examples here. Once we get a few here, we will I'll open up Midjourney once more, and I'll try to maybe what can be fun is we can just mix and match these, which is kind of like a mini neural network. We can kind of mix and match these based on random to me patterns, and then see what we get at the end. Great. Let's do this for, I don't know, 30 more seconds, and then I'll share my screen again, and we'll get into Midjourney.
These details are beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, I have to look up Jack in the Pulpit. Wait a minute.
Isn't that a plant?
I gotta look it up. I have it's a pitcher plant.
Yeah. Which are so fascinating.
We have
native
so
to
many
North
of
Carolina.
them in the garden.
Native to North Carolina. When I learned that, I almost fell out of my chair.
Wow.
They're not from Costa Rica or something. They're literally native to Appalachia.
Yeah.
It's like a temperate rainforest.
Wow. And it's I didn't know.
Oh, it's related to, okay. Yeah, it does look like a pitcher.
It's a carnivorous plant. I did not know that's what it was called.
Yeah.
I miss out on the nicknames. And it does. It looks just like a little pitcher. Aha. Beautiful stuff.
Oh, I'm seeing Harvey's note.
Okay. Not a carnivorous plant, but a pitcher plants are carnivorous. Come on. Did we mention that Grace is our science?
Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah.
At USBG?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. You see, I have no idea.
Okay, so Harvey, we're just hopefully if this is clear, we're not actually prompting quite yet.
Yeah,
We're not in the AI tool AI tool yet. We're just kind of literally just inputting into like sticky notes as if we were in, like at a groupthink session. But I will prompt for us from my end, and I guess I can do that now. All right, so we've got plenty. Folks, feel free to continue looking at the Miro board from your side. Courtney, it might be helpful. I don't know. Like, would it make sense? Can I? Oh, I guess both of us can share. Okay, it might be a little.
Yeah, let's see if it looks what it looks like, and if it's a little too cumbersome, then
Okay.
Okay.
Well, Courtney, since you're on stage, why don't you? Because I can't see the Miro board. Why don't you just shout out, sort of at random, the components, and I'll sort of order them. Sort of synthesize them in a prompt. We can do this like 2 or 3 times.
Okay. All right. I have grandma and her best friends. I'm literally just looking and grab it. Grandma and her best friends.
Grandma and little friends.
Not her little friends. Don't play with grandma like that.
Okay.
Okay. Are we ready for the green now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh yeah, we're gonna go with Jack in the Pulpit just because it just got so much shine. Let's do it.
Okay. You know what? I realized I should have switched I'll keep the Jack in the Pulpit in mind.
Okay.
In mind. What is that? What are they?
Picture plant.
Or what's the action? I guess. Or because we have the plant, but we don't have an action.
What kinds of plants? Why
don't we say
how
foraging?
Are people interacting with them?
Yeah, there should be a verb there somewhere. So like, how are they? Why don't we say foraging?
Okay. And that's a good thing for us to keep in mind. It's not just the objects, but it's important to include how the objects are interacting with each other.
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
And then how about an environment?
Okay. And the environment is in car-free streets. In car-free streets.
All right. And the location?
The DMV. Come on.
It's not going to know. It's not going to. I'll just say in DC. I'll say in Southern Maryland.
Actually, you know what? Let's do this. The in Finland. Let's do that.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I like that.
Let's go crazy.
I'll even be more specific. I'll say on the coast of Finland.
Okay. Because now that gives us.
Actually, let's say more. Since we're talking about car-free streets, let's say Helsinki. That's in Finland, right?
Yes. Unless I'm wrong.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna just so that we, it takes a little bit more of the screen and we have a landscape orientation. I'm gonna add a parameter so that it's in landscape.
Okay.
All right. We'll see what happens. In the meantime, why don't we fire up another one?
Okay. All righty. Let's start back again. Let's go into a young Asian boy. Eating a Venus flytrap. In a small town's main street.
And what's the location?
Peru.
Okay, I'm going to say in rural Peru.
Okay. Just grandma and her little friends.
That's right. And so this is exactly what I was saying. We didn't say what kind of grandma, right? Or what? Not grandmas come in kinds, but
right.
We didn't say what grandma looked like.
Yeah.
And we, right, and so you can see that, and if this is what that person's grandmother looks like, or close to what the person that added this, that's fine. That might be fine. Mm-hmm. But if I were prompting this, I would need to add. I would just know that I would need to add more. I would need to add more description because my grandmother doesn't look like this.
Got it. Because but they're best. So let's see. We have folks in the chat say, look, they're wearing the same scarf. It's because they're besties, right? Like right. That's why. Yeah. I guess that's that bestie symbol.
Oh yeah, he's in there. That's crazy.
He's really in.
This was
Oh boy. Wow.
Let's see. Which one of these do we want to blow up? I like this one. Yeah.
This is
That's
cool.
fun.
This is cool. This is a great way to just break it down and kind of know what areas you can add more detail to. But it's a great framework of mind to.
Yep. And I think I'll just test out some of the tools here.
Yeah.
Let's see. If I bury strong, I'm just curious if I were to like.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if it'll do it. Sometimes this feature doesn't always work as well as it could. I'm just trying to see what would my grandma look like in this scenario.
Yeah.
By the way, we use this common name here. I found, depending on the plant, sometimes the scientific name can be better. And sometimes, and I mentioned earlier, without going into detail here for the purposes of this, you can also import a photo that you have on your hard drive or from the internet. That the image will base it on that. So you can actually use an image and combine it with text and have an image and a text prompt. And the image and the image that comes, the generated image, will look at both of those.
Okay, because clearly they don't know. They were me before I realized that it was a pitcher plant, because this is a different plant each time. Now, Grace did drop what the scientific name was. My Latin escapes me. And so
I'll copy it from the chat.
Okay. I'm gonna I'll bring it down some. Can you see it? There we go.
Yeah.
I just brought it.
I'm seeing Lev. So anytime you see a double hyphen at the end of a Midjourney prompt, that is going to be a parameter. What's called a parameter. There's plenty of documentation for the dozens of parameters that you can use in a Midjourney prompt. They can control everything from aspect ratio, like I showed with the the hyphen AR. The hyphen S stands for style. So I think it might just be a default, which is why it's at 50. But style actually goes from 0 to 1,000. So mine is set pretty low. But it basically is like, how much do you want to put your thumb on the scale for the algorithm to take over and sort of make your image wackier? So the closer you get to 1,000, like the kind of crazier and like more artistic and like kind of psychedelic and in a way they get. I tend to turn that down because it's making the algorithm do more work. And I tend to like to have my prompts be as close to the raw algorithm as possible. This is a personal preference. If you're doing more illustrative work, then some of those stylization, I think there's like a hyphen, there's like a chaos parameter. There's a weird parameter. There's ways to get to really radically alter how the machine works with your prompt. So, okay, let me just try this real quick.
Okay. Are you adding in the scientific term?
Yep.
Okay. And we see the Black Grandma came up.
Yep. We did get a couple of those.
And it's so interesting because we feel like we know these people. Like this.
Well,
they have to exist. And I think that is what is also so powerful about, some of the things that we're doing, because once you can get it in your mind, it's no longer far-fetched, right? It's longer something that is like completely undoable, right? Like we can do
That's right.
In this practice of creating these images that might not exist right here and right now, but as you were talking about, it might exist the day after tomorrow, right? Just because now we're using tools to kind of get those ideas in our minds, and based on those ideas, we're going to start setting some goals.
Yeah, that's right. Or even if it's like, now that once you've seen the image, it's now in your subconscious, like who knows how that might alter, how you. So it looks like the scientific name didn't change anything. It might have made it worse. I don't know. I think in some cases, in some ways, it's like this could be a fun project in and of its own, like where you're just embracing these kind of fictional plants. That's what I found is interesting, because I do a lot of most of the plants I am prompting when I use plants in my prompts are not really ornamentals. They're things like pokeweed and goldenrod and dandelions and things like that. Some of them will get it. Like some of the more recognizable ones, like obviously dandelion is going to show up a lot in its model, but pokeweed probably not as much, right? And so, or amaranth or whatever. And so, those are the plants that it just kind of takes a guess. And it's like, and it like puts it in the image.
Okay.
And I found that that's kind of interesting too, because I don't know that similar to what Linda has been doing in her work. I think that's its own kind of. I don't mind embracing that as a kind of artifact of the model.
And I think we kind of touched on this in some of our like preliminary talks, which have also been amazing. But you had mentioned something like maybe the more we put something in to these prompts, the more associations it can build.
Oh, yes. Yes. So she's talking about when we talked, there was an article, I can't remember where I got it, but there was an article that I came across where they were basically saying in as few as 20 years from now, that a majority of the like trillions of images that are on the internet right now will for the first time you'll have a majority of those images actually being made with AI. So, and if AI tools are like ChatGPT are like sucking up the internet and scraping the entire internet, that means they're also scraping up AI generated imagery. So you have machine media trading the media that comes out of other machines. And if that's true, then I argue, and Linda argues, and this article argues that like folks that are already underrepresented in the media actually have a crucial role to play in the kinds of media that ends up on the internet, so that we can actually have a future in the historical record. It's a really trippy thing to think about, but like and you can make the argument that in a way the work, the kinds of prompts that I'm doing in Midjourney, and at some level, it may be infinitesimally small level, is training the data, or training the machine to sort of perceive, again, not to anthropomorphize, is training the machine to perceive Black liberation or Black joy. And I wonder what the implications of that are for the internet at large.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it all starts with a question, right? I wonder.
Yeah.
I wonder.
That article was called "The Treachery of Images." I was able to find it quickly on my phone.
Okay.
I can.
And Carla, Carla gave a prompt in the chat, and I played around with it. Let's see. I played around with it a bit. Yep, anyone with the link. Let's see. Carla's prompt was something like, where'd it go? But I put it in there, and we'll see. We'll see. And what is absolutely wonderful about this is, sounds like the process, because I think we're led to believe that AI will necessarily makes things all easier, and like all of the work and all of the cognitive load is happening on AI's end. But I think we're finding out tonight that this takes a lot of cognitive load on our end. I mean, it is like this intersection of, what do you know about history? What do you know about style? What do you know about literature and your words and descriptions, and just bringing all of those things into play? Now, what do you know about botany? What do you know about the needs of conservation? All of that in our hybridized body comes into play for this kind of work.
Right. That's right. Yeah. And that's why I always, whenever, because a lot of folks, especially folks with the, folks on the internet, folks that like to comment on things, I'll say, on the internet, it's easy to like just say, oh, like AI, you know, if you're using AI, you don't know how to be self-express. You don't know how to express yourself creatively.
Right.
And I was like, I got a decade of research and embodied, decades. If we're talking about childhood, like of embodied knowledge and lived experience that I'm bringing to bear. And that it's really just a different way of working with the tool. I also tend to like calling it a tool. Then for me, like also like helps me to work with it in the way that it is, which is in context with other things. But you have to learn. I found that I had to, learning how to use it was was almost as daunting as when I opened up InDesign for the first time and saw all these panels all over the screen, or when I opened Ableton for the first time and was like, how do I make a sound? Like all of this it is not. I think unfortunately there's a lot of really generic looking stuff that people have made with AI on the internet, and that has colored people's understanding of what goes into the process. Prompting engineer is now a position that you can apply for and work at in tech. Like that job description didn't exist a year or two ago. So I think it's just going to be interesting to see what the future of work is, what new jobs come up that we don't even know the job titles of yet. It'll be interesting to see what the role of taste is as we continue to create media, and I just think it's going to be a really weird, but really probably really fascinating time, especially for folks that are in media and tech worlds.
Yeah, and even tech worlds, art worlds, community initiative worlds, just the things that, I mean, what you're sitting in front of, like your green screen here, started with. Actually, can you tell us about that? Because I'm not sure if what you have behind you came up in conversation, and I think it connects to
Wait, sorry, what was that?
What you have behind you, like the quilt and the like, what your photo. Yes, can you tell us about that? Because I really think it connects.
Yeah, so when I first started this series on Instagram, I was already doing quite a lot of research on like the aesthetics of Black culture, and was just thinking about like beyond just plants and the settings, like what tropes of like beauty, or maybe go under celebrated in the, or for the in the. It took how long for the G's Bend quilters from Alabama to kind of enter the canon of like of legitimate American artists. Like it was like the 70s, I think, when they were in the Whitney for the first time, right? So like I think this is just a way for me to like challenge these like customary sort of aesthetic traditions that are rooted in black diasporic sort of Southern culture, and like again just amplifying them or transporting them to these uncanny settings.
And
I think when I first started making,
I'm sorry, I'm so sorry.
Oh,
go ahead. I get excited. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm also thinking quite a bit, without revealing too much. I'm thinking quite a bit about the kinds of artifacts I might make for the installation that I've got in the upcoming Smithsonian Design Triennial, which was just announced a couple of days ago. So I'm going to be creating a series of things. I think is the most I can say.
Okay.
That will be at the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum, Smithsonian Design Museum in New York in November. So I'm thinking quite a lot about the maybe AI's role, or just even just the role of like the women in my family, right, in shaping the aesthetics of the Black home. Those are the kinds of things that I'm kind of thinking through ahead of the show, or really my work more broadly. But AI has been really great, just kind of even in my spare time. Like I made this image right before I got on here. For the purposes of it being a backdrop. And so I'm always just kind of like in my mind, just thinking, well, like, what would this look like? Or what could this moment be? Or what's the atmosphere that I would like to create for a given project, or for a given kind of dream. So.
Yeah. This has been incredible. When we first started our talks about in April, We both had this push to send this message out, and I think that this evening was a wonderful wonderful component of a dream that we have, Curry. I think this is awesome.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like this is it makes me so sad, but we are out of time tonight. I mean, 90 minutes has
Yeah.
flown by.
Yeah.
But we want to thank you so much for sharing your skills, your expertise, sharing just teaching us how to begin in this AI journey and to not necessarily be so apprehensive, continue to ask the questions, continue to keep top of mind some of the shortcomings that come along with this, but also to continue to dream bigger and to use the tools available to us to do so.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate you coming and sharing with us this evening. Folks online, thank you so much for attending today. To learn about our future online program offerings, please visit usbg.gov/programs. Also note you'll receive a brief survey in your inbox for this program this evening. We would really, really appreciate your feedback. Thanks for spending your evening with us. You all have a great night. Thanks again, Curry.
Thanks so much, everybody. Of course. Thank you. This has been
All
great.
right.